A chance encounter. Private Nathan Thompson crouched in a smoking crater, the war-torn landscape of the planet Kraze stretching out around him. Plasma bolts flew overhead, and the acrid smell of burnt metal and flesh filled the air. His cybernetic eye implants whirred as they adjusted to the chaos, scanning for threats. Sweat dripped from his brow, stinging his eyes, but he ignored it. He had a mission to complete. A scream pierced the cacophony, sharp and terrified. Nathan's head snapped around, and he saw a young Soren female, barely 16 Earth years old, cowering in the rubble. Her scales, normally a vibrant green, were dulled to a sickly gray, caked with soot and blood. She was clearly terrified and in pain. Nathan's training kicked in, and he raised his plasma rifle, the safety clicking off with a grim finality. His orders were clear: take no prisoners. But as he looked into the wide, fear-filled eyes of the Soren girl, he found himself unable to pull the trigger. She was just a child, caught in the horrors of a war she didn't understand. Before he could make a decision, a squad of Soren soldiers emerged from a nearby outpost. They opened fire, plasma bolts sizzling through the air. Nathan rolled, placing himself between the girl and the oncoming fire. A plasma bolt seared into his shoulder, but he gritted his teeth and returned fire, taking down the Soren soldiers one by one until they lay smoking on the ground. Breathing heavily, Nathan turned back to the girl. She stared at him, shock, gratitude, and fear warring in her eyes. "It's okay," he said softly, though he doubted she understood his words. "I'm not going to hurt you." He knew he had to reconnect with his squad, but he also knew he couldn't leave her behind. She might have valuable information that could help the humans in their fight against the Sorens. More importantly, he couldn't bring himself to abandon her to the horrors of war. "Come on," he said, reaching out a hand to her. "We need to get out of here." The girl hesitated, then took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Nathan helped her to her feet, and together they began to make their way through the rubble-strewn streets, moving cautiously, every shadow a potential threat. Unexpected allies. Nathan and the Soren girl, whom he had learned was named Thos, crept through the desolate streets, the sound of distant explosions echoing around them. The landscape was a nightmare of twisted metal and collapsed buildings, a grim testament to the ferocity of the conflict. Nathan's shoulder throbbed with pain, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. As they rounded a corner, they stumbled upon a group of Soren civilians huddled in the ruins of a collapsed building. Many were injured, their scales torn and bloodied. Nathan hesitated, his instincts warring with his orders. He had been trained to see the Sorens as the enemy, but these were just people, suffering and scared. Thos looked at him, her eyes questioning. Nathan made his decision. He knelt beside the nearest Soren, a young male with a deep cut on his leg. Pulling out his medkit, Nathan began cleaning and bandaging the wound. Thos watched in amazement as he moved from one injured Soren to the next, treating their injuries with gentle efficiency. "Why are you helping them?" Thos asked, her voice filled with confusion. "I thought humans were ruthless and uncaring. At least, that's what the Confederation always told us." Nathan looked up at her, his hands still working. "Not all humans are the same, Thos, just like not all Sorens are the enemy. We're all just people caught up in this damn war." They moved on, leaving the grateful Sorens behind. As they continued their journey, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. They found shelter in an abandoned building, its walls pockmarked with blast holes. Nathan took the first watch, letting Thos curl up in a corner to sleep. He sat by the window, his rifle across his knees, watching the darkness creep in. His mind raced with thoughts of the past few days. He had gone against orders, risked his life for an enemy child, and now he was hiding in the ruins of a city, far from his squad. He knew he had made the right choice, but doubt gnawed at him. What if he had made a mistake? What if he was leading them both to their deaths? Nathan looked over at Thos, her face peaceful in sleep. No, he realized. He had done the right thing. Even in the midst of war, there was room for compassion and understanding. He just hoped it wouldn't get them both killed. A dangerous path. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon as Nathan and Thos set out once more. They moved cautiously, every sense on high alert. Nathan's shoulder throbbed with pain, but he ignored it, focusing on the task at hand. Thos spotted it first. An old Soren outpost, its walls crumbling but still standing. "There," she said, pointing. "It looks abandoned. Maybe we can find a way to contact my people." Nathan nodded. "Worth a shot. Let's check it out." They approached the outpost cautiously, scanning for any signs of life or active defenses. The place seemed dead. Nathan motioned for Thos to follow him. But as they reached the entrance, a sharp click sounded beneath his boot. His blood ran cold. A mine. He reacted on instinct, shoving Thos hard, sending her flying clear. The world erupted in fire and shrapnel, the force of the blast hurling Nathan backward. He slammed into the rubble, his head cracking against concrete. Pain lanced through his leg, sharp and searing. He looked down to see blood pouring from a jagged wound in his thigh, his pants shredded. "Nathan." Thos scrambled to his side, her eyes wide with fear. "You're hurt." He gritted his teeth, trying to stand, but his leg wouldn't hold him. "I'm fine. We have to keep moving." Thos shook her head. "No way. You can barely walk. We need to get inside, find some medical supplies." She pulled his arm over her shoulders, taking his weight. Together, they staggered into the outpost. Thos lowered him gently to the floor. "Wait here," she said. "I'll see what I can find." Nathan leaned his head back against the wall, trying to steady his breathing. The pain was intense, pulsing with every heartbeat. He hoped Thos found something useful. He didn't fancy his chances of making it very far like this. Thos returned, her arms full of dusty medical gear. She knelt beside him and began cutting away the fabric around the wound. Her hands were surprisingly gentle as she cleaned away the blood and assessed the damage. "You're lucky," she said. "It missed the artery, but you've lost a lot of blood. I need to disinfect it and close the wound." She soaked a pad in antiseptic and pressed it to his thigh. Nathan hissed in pain, his fists clenching. Thos worked quickly, her movements efficient and practiced. Nathan watched her, impressed despite the pain. "You seem to know a lot about treating humans," he said. "For a Soren, I mean." Thos glanced up at him, a small smile playing on her lips. "I studied your anatomy for years. I always hoped I could be a doctor, maybe help foster understanding between our peoples. Stupid dream, I guess, in the middle of a war." Nathan was silent for a moment, considering her words. All this time, he'd only seen the Sorens as the enemy, as a threat to humanity's survival. But maybe there was more to them than that. Maybe this whole damn war was just a misunderstanding, fueled by fear and prejudice on both sides. Thos finished bandaging his leg and sat back. "That should hold for now, but you need real medical attention and soon." Nathan opened his mouth to reply, but a sound from outside cut him off. Voices, footsteps, the clink of human weaponry. His heart sank. The Federation had found them. The interrogation. The door burst open, and soldiers poured in, rifles raised. Leading them was Sergeant Jackson, Nathan's squad leader. Jackson's face was grim as he took in the scene. "Private Thompson," Jackson barked. "You want to explain why you're here with a Soren instead of at your post." Nathan struggled to his feet, ignoring the pain in his leg. "Sir, she's not a threat. She saved my life. We have to." "I don't want to hear it. Private," Jackson snapped. "That creature is a valuable asset. Hand her over now." "That's an order." Nathan looked at Thos. She met his gaze, her eyes filled with fear and resignation. He knew he should obey, but every instinct screamed at him to protect her, to stand his ground. "No, sir," he said quietly. "I won't let you take her." Jackson's face darkened with rage. He stepped forward, raising his rifle. Nathan braced himself, ready to fight, but Thus moved first. She stepped in front of Nathan, her hands raised. "I surrender," she said, her voice steady. "Please don't hurt him." The soldiers swarmed forward, grabbing Thus roughly. They dragged her away, out of the outpost. Nathan tried to follow, but his leg gave out, and he fell hard. "Thus," he shouted, but she was gone, swallowed up by the ranks of Federation soldiers. Nathan slumped against the wall, despair washing over him. He had failed her, failed in his duty. But as he sat there, a new resolve hardened in his heart. He would find a way to save those, no matter the cost. And somehow, someway, he would find a way to end this war once and for all. A desperate plan. Nathan lay on a hospital bed in the Human Federation base, wincing as the medic stitched up his shrapnel wounds. His mind raced with thoughts of those and the sacrifice she had made for him. The guilt gnawed at his insides, sharper than any physical pain. The door hissed open, and Sergeant Jackson strode in, his face grim. "You've got some explaining to do, Private," he growled. "What the hell were you thinking, running off with that Soren?" Nathan met his gaze unflinching. "Her name is Thos, sir, and she saved my life more than once." Jackson scoffed. "Saved your life? That lizard is a high-value target. She has intel we need to win this war. And now, thanks to you, we've got her locked up in a cell, waiting to be interrogated." Nathan's heart sank. He couldn't let that happen. He couldn't let those suffer for his mistakes. He had to make this right. After Jackson left, Nathan hobbled out of the medbay, his mind set. He found Mike in the barracks, cleaning his rifle. "I need your help," Nathan said, keeping his voice low. "We have to get those out of that detention center." Mike looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "Are you crazy? You want to break out a Soren prisoner? She's not just a prisoner, Mike. She's a person, and she doesn't deserve to be tortured for information." Mike was silent for a long moment, searching Nathan's face. Finally, he sighed. "All right, man. I'm with you. What's the plan?" They spent the next few hours going over every detail, studying the layout of the detention center, the guard rotations, the security systems. They would make their move during the night shift when the skeleton crew was on duty. As darkness fell, they slipped out of the barracks and made their way to the detention center. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest as they crept through the halls, every shadow a potential threat. They reached the cell block without incident, but as Nathan approached Thaw's cell, alarms blared to life. Guards poured into the corridor, weapons drawn. "Halt! Identify yourselves," one of them shouted. Nathan and Mike exchanged a glance. Then all hell broke loose. Plasma bolts filled the air as they dove for cover. Nathan returned fire, taking down 2 guards with well-placed shots, but there were too many of them. The odds were stacked against them. A cry of pain cut through the chaos. Nathan turned to see Mike slumped against the wall, a smoking hole in his chest. "Mike!" Nathan screamed, scrambling to his friend's side. Mike grabbed Nathan's arm, his eyes fierce despite the pain. "Get to the girl," he gasped. "End this damn war for all of us." With a final shuddering breath, Mike went still. Nathan blinked back tears, grief and rage welling up inside him. He couldn't let Mike's sacrifice be in vain. A promise and a sacrifice. Nathan fought his way to Thaw's cell, blasting the lock with a plasma bolt. Thaw stared at him in shock as he pulled her out. "Nathan, what are you doing here?" "Getting you out," Nathan replied grimly. "Come on, we don't have much time." They raced through the halls, dodging plasma fire and fallen bodies. Finally, they burst out into the cool night air, gasping for breath. Thos turned to Nathan, her eyes wide. "I don't understand. Why did you come back for me?" Nathan took her hand, meeting her gaze. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because I care about you, and because I think you and I might be the only hope for stopping this war." He explained his plan, the idea that had taken root in his mind, to bring the leaders of their people together, to show them that they had more in common than they realized, that peace was possible if they were willing to fight for it. Thos listened, her expression shifting from disbelief to tentative hope. "Do you really think it could work?" she asked softly. "That we could end all this bloodshed and hatred?" "I have to believe it," Nathan said. "For Mike's sake, for all the lives lost on both sides. We have to try." Thos nodded slowly, resolve hardening in her eyes. "Then I'm with you," she said. "No matter what happens, we'll face it together, side by side." The human soldier and the Soren medic set off into the night, united by a shared dream of peace. The path ahead would be dangerous, the odds stacked against them. But for the first time in a long time, they had hope, and that was enough. A new beginning. Nathan and Thos stood side by side in the stark conference room, the weight of their task heavy on their shoulders. The room buzzed with a tense energy as the leaders of the Human Federation and Soren Confederation took their seats, eyeing each other warily across the table. Thos stepped forward, her heart pounding. She looked to Nathan, drawing strength from his presence. He nodded, a silent reassurance. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "I know there is a long history of bloodshed and mistrust between our peoples," Thos said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "But I stand before you today as proof that we are not so different. Understanding and cooperation are possible if we are willing to try." She spoke of her time with Nathan, of the compassion and bravery he had shown her, of how he had risked everything to save her life, to fight for a chance at peace. "This war has taken a toll on all of us," Thos continued, her gaze sweeping the room. "How many more lives must be lost before we realize that violence is not the answer? It's time to put aside our differences and work towards a common goal, a future where our children can grow up without the shadow of war hanging over them." As she spoke, Thos saw the expressions on the leaders' faces begin to shift, the hard lines of anger and suspicion softening into something like contemplation, even hope. But before anyone could respond, the doors to the conference room burst open. A group of armed soldiers stormed in, led by a grizzled colonel with a wild look in his eyes. "Traitors!" he shouted, leveling his rifle at the Soren delegation. "You really think we can trust these scaly bastards? They killed my family." Chaos erupted as the soldiers opened fire, plasma bolts sizzling through the air, shattering the delicate truce. Nathan reacted on instinct, throwing himself in front of Thos. She screamed as the bolts tore into his flesh, his blood spattering hot across her face. They collapsed to the ground together, Nathan's body shielding hers. The Soren guards leaped into action, subduing the attackers with ruthless efficiency, but it was too late. The damage had been done. Thos cradled Nathan's head in her lap, her tears mixing with his blood. His breathing was shallow, his eyes unfocused. "Nathan, stay with me," Thos pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please, you can't leave me." Nathan's hand found hers, his grip weak. "Promise me," he whispered, each word an effort. "Promise you'll find a way to end this war. Don't let my death be in vain." Thos nodded fiercely, even as sobs racked her body. "I promise," she choked out. "I'll never stop fighting for peace. For you." With a final shuddering breath, Nathan went still. Thos howled in anguish, clutching his body to her chest. Around them, the leaders of both sides watched in stunned, horrified silence. In the days that followed, shock gave way to grief, and then to grim determination. Thos threw herself into the peace negotiations with a fervor bordering on obsession. She would not let Nathan's sacrifice be for nothing. It was a long and arduous process, full of setbacks and compromises, but slowly, painfully, progress was made. A ceasefire was declared, then a tentative truce. Borders were redrawn, treaties signed. The weapons of war were laid down, replaced by the tools of diplomacy and rebuilding. Through it all, Thos was there, a tireless advocate for peace and understanding. She traveled between the Human Federation and Soren Confederation, building bridges, healing old wounds. She became a symbol of hope, a living embodiment of the ideals Nathan had died for. Years passed, and the scars of war began to fade. Cities were rebuilt, families reunited. A new generation grew up, one that had never known the horrors of the battlefield. And on a quiet hillside overlooking the capital city of the newly formed Galactic Alliance, a memorial was erected in Nathan's honor, a simple stone monument inscribed with his name and the words, "He gave his life so that others might live in peace." Those stood before the memorial, a single flower clutched in her hand. Tears streamed down her face as she remembered the brave human soldier who had shown her the true meaning of sacrifice, of love. She placed the flower at the base of the monument, a final tribute. "I miss you every day," Thos whispered. "But I know that wherever you are, you're watching over us. Your legacy lives on in the peace we've built, in the lives we've saved. Thank you, Nathan, for everything." As she turned to leave, Thos felt a gentle breeze caress her face, almost like a loving touch. And for a moment, she swore she could hear Nathan's voice on the wind, whispering the words that had become her mantra, her guiding light. "Find a way to end this war. Don't let my death be in vain." Thos smiled through her tears, renewed determination filling her heart. She would keep fighting, keep building the future Nathan had dreamed of. A future of peace, of unity, a future worth dying for.